Utilitarianism. So, what is utilitarianism? Utilitarianism is a theory of morality which advocates actions that foster happiness and opposes actions that cause unhappiness. Utilitarianism promotes the greatest amount of good for the greatest number of people. Ang ibig sabihin ng utilitarianismo ay isang teorya ng moralidad na nagtataguyod ng mga aksyon na nagpapaunlad ng kaligayahan at sumasalamat sa mga aksyon na nagdudulot ng kalungkutan. Ang utilitarianismo ay nagtataguyod ng pinakamalaking halaga ng kabutihan para sa pinakamaraming bilang ng mga tao. The utility, usefulness, or moral rightness of a policy is measured by its tendency to promote the good or to prevent harm. According to Jeremy Bentham, the good is simply pleasure. Ang mabuti ay simpleng kasiyahan. Jeremy Bentham is considered as the father of utilitarianism. Bentham was an English philosopher born in 1748 into a family of lawyers and lived during a time of major social, political, and economic change. He himself was a lawyer, though he never practiced the profession. According to John Stuart Mill, the good is happiness, a more complex notion achieved by living a principled and prudent life. Ayon sa kanya, ang mabuti ay kaligayahan, isang mas komplikadong paniwala na nakamit sa pamamagitan ng pamumuhay ng may prinsipyo at masinop na buhay. The origin of utilitarianism. Bentham found pain and pleasure to be the only intrinsic values in the world. In this he derived the rule of utility that good is whatever brings the greatest happiness to the greatest number of people. Bentham's foremost proponent was James Mill and his son John Stuart Mill, who was educated from a young age according to the Bentham's principle. In his famous 1861 short work Utilitarianism, John Stuart Mill both named the movement and refined Bentham's original principles. Mill argued that cultural, intellectual, and spiritual pleasures are of a greater value than mere physical pleasure, as valued by a competent judge, which according to Mill is anyone who has experienced both the lower and higher pleasures.
There are two types of utilitarianism, the rule and act utilitarianism, and both strive to maximize the utility of an action for the good of humankind. They only differ in the way they approach this task. Rule utilitarianism believes that a set of rules or moral codes should be used to standardize behaviors. What is act utilitarianism? Act utilitarianism is a utilitarian theory of ethics which states that a person's act is morally right if and only if it produces the best possible results in the specific situation. What is an act utilitarianism example? When individuals are deciding what to do for themselves alone, they consider only their own utility. For example, if you are choosing ice cream for yourself, the utilitarian view is that you should choose the flavor that will give you the most pleasure. So, ano naman ang rule utilitarianism? Rule utilitarianism is a form of utilitarianism that says an action is right as it conforms to a rule that leads to the greatest good, or that the rightness and wrongness of a particular action is a function of the correctness of the rule of which it is an instance. So next, what is the example of rule utilitarianism? In Lisseber terms, road rules are an example of rule utilitarianism. While it is true that sometimes a person can drive safely even when not following a marked speed limit, it is preferable for all people to follow a standard set of road rules, regardless of an individual scenarios. Application of utilitarian theory. First, if you can use 80 soldiers as a decoy in a war, and thereby attack an enemy force and kill several hundred enemy soldiers, that is a morally good choice even though the 80 might be lost. Second, if lying or stealing will actually bring about more happiness and or reduce pain, act utilitarianism says we should lie and steal in those cases.
Principle of utilitarianism. There are three principles of utilitarianism. First is the pleasure is the only thing that truly has intrinsic value. Second is actions are right insofar as they promote happiness, wrong insofar as they produce unhappiness. Third is everyone's happiness counts equally. Principle is pleasure is the only thing that truly has intrinsic value. To say that something has intrinsic value means that it is simply good in itself. A world in which these things exist or is possessed or experienced is better than a world without it. Pleasure and happiness, though, are unique in being valued purely for their own sake. No other reason for valuing them needs to be given. It is better to be happy than sad. This can't really be proved, but everyone thinks this. Principle is actions are right insofar as they promote happiness, wrong insofar as they produce unhappiness. This principle is controversial because many people would say that what decides the morality of an action is the motive behind it. Thus, it makes utilitarianism a form of consequentialism since it says that the morality of an action is decided by its consequences. The more happiness is produced among those affected by the action, the better the action is. Third principle is everyone's happiness counts equally. This principle of equality was progressive. When one maximizes the good, it is the good impartially considered. It is also the reason why utilitarianism is very far removed from any kind of egoism. Hence, one's good counts for no more than anyone else's good. Criticisms of utilitarianism. Measuring and comparing happiness among different people is impossible, not only in the practice but even in principle. Utilitarianism plays fast and loose with God's commandments. If lying, stealing, or killing could lead to an increase of happiness for the greatest number, we are told we should lie, steal, or kill. Isn't that a rejection of God's commands? Bernard Williams criticizes the implied doctrine of negative responsibility in utilitarianism. Situation: a thug breaks into my home and holds 6 people hostage, telling us he will kill all of us. However, the thug says, "If you will kill 2 of your family, I will let you and the other 3 live." With utilitarianism, the good thing to do is to kill 2 members of my family. Another situation is if I am to bring the greatest happiness to the greatest number, not putting my own happiness above others, that may lead to a dilemma. I live in a neighborhood where 83% of my neighbors use drugs. I could make them most happy by helping supply them with cheap drugs, but I feel uncomfortable doing that. What should a utilitarian do?
Conclusion: the theory of utilitarianism is sound, logical and consistent. Utilitarianism ethics follow the law of greatest happiness. According to this law, human beings seek to decrease suffering and maximize happiness. Hence, an action that is correctly morally must lead to the greatest possible pleasure. This also implies that actions that causes pain in human being are morally wrong. As seen in the previous arguments, this theory is beyond reproach. Applying utilitarianism in business. The four elements. The first element is consequentialism. It is the understanding that the wrongness or rightness of action is entirely determined by their action. For example, a business may manufacture and sell substandard and unsafe products and their quest for more, even though it is contradicting the moral and ethical system. Because for them, it benefits their organization and can make more profits. The second element is welfareism. According to Eggleston 453, welfareism is the understanding that the wrongness or rightness of operation depends on society's conception of welfare or well-being. Example in business, the management may decide to increase the wages and benefits of their employees if it improves the well-being or promotes the happiness of their employees. The third element is individualism. The principle of individualism in utilitarianism holds that every individual has a human nature pursues happiness. Those will engage in actions that maximize utility. The fourth element is aggregation, which is the notion that the wrongness or rightness of actions depends on their ability to average the benefits brought to all individuals. For example, by selling quality and sell products, a business will be increasing its intrinsic value while meeting the needs of their customers at the same time.
In business and commerce, utilitarianism holds that the most ethical choice is the one of that will produce the greatest good for the greatest number. Only moral framework that can justify military force or war. Utilitarianism is the most common approach to business ethics. In the corporate workplace, most companies have a formal or informal code of ethics, which is shaped by their corporate culture, values, and regional law. Having a formalized code of business ethics is more important than ever. Companions must endeavor to keep their promises and put ethics at least on part with profits. Consumers are looking for companions that they can trust, and employees work better when there is a solid model in ethics in place. Morally correct decision at work increase everyone's happiness. However, doing something morally wrong, even if legal, then everyone's happiness will decrease.